The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with golds and oranges as Clara and her friends, Sophia, Lucas, and Miguel, approached the secluded beach for their long-awaited summer camp. The beach, known for its pristine beauty and tranquil atmosphere, seemed like the perfect place for a city break. Clara, the leader of the group, had always been fascinated by horror stories and supernatural mysteries. She suggested the idea of camping on the beach after hearing rumors about strange events that occurred there during full moon nights. Despite her friend's warnings, Clara's curiosity was insatiable, and she was determined to investigate. The group arrived at their campsite, a small cove surrounded by tall sand dunes and marked by a pre-existing campfire. The full moon was rising in the sky, illuminating the beach in silvery light and creating an idyllic setting for the night. They set up their tents and lit a fire, creating a warm and inviting atmosphere. As the fire crackled, Clara shared her idea of telling horror stories before bed. Sophia, the most skeptical of the group, laughed at the suggestion, but agreed to participate, as long as the stories weren't too scary. Lucas and Miguel, who loved a good dose of suspense, immediately agreed. Sitting around the campfire with the sound of waves gently crashing on the beach as a soundtrack, they began to tell their stories. Sophia, being the first, told of an inexplicable experience in an old house where she believed she heard whispering voices in the middle of the night. Her story was chilling enough to give you chills, but not scary enough to traumatize. Lucas, the group's clown, told a lighter story about a ghost dog that supposedly haunted a local park. Everyone laughed at his exaggerated imitations and frightening sounds. Miguel shared a story about a mysterious island, Haunted Island, which was a few miles away from the beach where they were camped. According to legend, the island was inhabited by restless spirits who only manifested themselves during the Night of the Spirits, which coincided with the full moon. Clara was especially intrigued by this story, as she had read about the island in an old book about local folklore. When Clara's turn came, she decided to tell a story she had heard from her grandfather when she was a child. It was a story about a malevolent mermaid who lured sailors into the depths of the ocean with her seductive song. As Clara narrated the story, the sea breeze seemed to become colder and the sound of the waves darker. With the last story told, the night was advancing and the full moon was high in the sky. The group was relaxed and in good spirits, but an inexplicable feeling of unrest began to set in. The sea breeze brought with it a whispering, indistinct sound, as if someone were whispering secrets in the shadows of the night. Clara looked around and noticed that the shadows of the trees surrounding the cove seemed to move in a strange way. She shook off the uncomfortable feeling, attributing it to the atmosphere filled with horror stories and an overactive imagination. However, that night on the beach was about to turn into an experience that would challenge all of their understanding of reality and the unknown. Despite the feeling of restlessness that hung over the group, everyone decided to go to their tents and try to sleep. Clara and Sophia shared one tent, while Lucas and Miguel occupied the other. The sea breeze became a constant murmur, and the gentle sound of the waves was like an invitation to sleep. Clara and Sophia huddled in their sleeping bags, looking up at the roof of the tent. The full moon cast a silvery light through the thin fabric, creating dancing shadows that played on the walls. The atmosphere was charged with the energy of the night, and Claire's mind was filled with horror stories and unsolved mysteries. As they tried to fall asleep, something strange started to happen. Subtle sounds, like distant whispers, echoed outside the tent. Clara and Sophia exchanged worried looks. The whispers were indistinct, but they seemed to get closer and closer. Claire strained her ear and was able to make out muffled words such as "come and follow us." She was alarmed and woke Sophia up. The two looked at each other, feeling a growing sense of fear. "What's going on out there?" Sophia whispered. "I don't know, but I think we should wake up Lucas and Miguel," replied Clara, her voice shaking. Carefully, the two girls left the tent and walked to the tent where the boys were sleeping. When they opened the door, they were faced with a terrifying sight. The shadows of the trees, which were once just shadows, had taken on a life of their own and transformed into hooded figures. The faces of the hooded men were hidden in the shadows, making it impossible to identify them. They kept whispering unintelligible words, and their eyes shone with an unearthly glow in the darkness of the night. Lucas and Miguel were sound asleep, oblivious to what was happening around them. The hooded figures seemed to be approaching them, as if they were about to touch their shoulders. Sophia and Clara wasted no time. They screamed frantically, waking Lucas and Miguel with a start. The boys, confused and dazed, jumped out of their tents, looking around with frightened eyes. The hooded figures retreated into the shadows of the trees, as if they feared the light of the full moon. The group stood there panting and terrified, staring at the retreating shadows. "What the hell was that?" Miguel whispered, his voice shaking. "We need to get out of here now," Lucas said, urgency in his voice. "These things don't look friendly." In a hurry, they dismantled their tents and grabbed their backpacks. Under the watchful eye of the hooded figures, the group began walking along the dark beach, with only the light of the moon to guide them. The distant, unsettling murmur continued, sending shivers down your spine with every step. What they didn't know was that the night was just beginning, and the mystery of the hooded figures was about to deepen. The beach that was once a paradise had turned into a nightmare that would challenge his courage and rationality. As the group walked along the dark beach under the moonlight, the hooded figures seemed to follow their movements, keeping a constant distance. The unintelligible murmur persisted, filling the air with a frightening and ominous atmosphere. Clara led the group, with Sophia, Lucas, and Miguel staying close. They tried to quicken their pace, but the hooded figures continued to follow them, always on the edge of their vision. Every time they tried to move away, the shadows seemed to multiply, as if they were spreading across the surrounding trees. In a moment of desperation, Clara decided to confront the hooded figures. She stopped abruptly and turned to face them, although she couldn't see their faces hidden by the shadows of their hoods. "Who are you? What do you want from us?" Clara demanded, her voice shaking with anxiety. The murmur intensified for a brief moment before dissipating. The hooded figures remained silent, giving no indication of their intentions. The tension in the air was palpable. Sophia pulled Clara's arm, visibly scared. "Clara, I don't think we should stay here. They don't seem willing to talk." Clara reluctantly agreed, and the group continued their walk, determined to find a safe place where they could take refuge. However, the hooded figures continued to follow them, like ominous shadows persisting in their pursuit. The beach seemed endless, and the group began to feel tiredness building up. The tension of the chase was fraying their nerves, and the uncertainty about what was happening kept them on constant alert. Finally, they spotted a fisherman's hut by the sea. It was the only building visible on that isolated part of the beach. With hearts racing, the group ran towards the cabin and hurriedly entered, locking the door behind them. Inside the hut, they breathed a sigh of relief for a brief moment. The dim moonlight streaming through the windows revealed a modest interior, littered with abandoned fishing nets and fishing utensils. The sound of waves hitting the rocks was the only thing that broke the tense silence. "What the hell were those things?" Lucas asked, still panting. "We don't know," Claire replied, her voice tense. "But they seem to follow us from the camp. We need to find a way out of this situation." The group settled into the cabin, trying to understand what was happening. The hooded figures were still out there in the shadows, whispering indistinct words. They knew they couldn't stay in the cabin forever, but they also couldn't risk leaving again. As they waited for morning, the group heard whispers from the shadows outside, as if the hooded figures were still lurking. The feeling of restlessness persisted, and the night seemed endless. They wondered if any of them would be able to find an explanation for the terror they had faced, and if they would be able to escape the pursuit of the hooded figures. The beach, once a peaceful haven, had turned into a nightmare scenario from which they could not easily escape. The night seemed to last an eternity inside the fisherman's hut. Clara, Sophia, Lucas, and Miguel were exhausted and nervous, listening to the unsettling whispers of the hooded figures outside. The moonlight, once comforting, was now just a grim reminder of the persecution they faced. Finally, as day broke, the whispers began to gradually subside, and the hooded figures retreated into the shadows of the trees. The light of the rising sun began to fill the cabin, dispelling the darkness that had surrounded them all night. Carefully, the group decided to leave the cabin and check if the hooded figures were gone. The beach was calm and deserted, as if nothing had happened that scary night. "What were those things?" asked Miguel, looking at the empty beach. "We'll never know for sure," Clara replied with a sigh of relief. "But we need to get out of here as quickly as possible." Nodding, they picked up their backpacks and began walking along the beach towards the meeting point where they had parked their cars. The sense of imminent danger had receded, but the previous night's experience continued to haunt them. As they drove back to the city, Claire couldn't help but wonder about the island mentioned in Miguel's story, the haunted island. Could it be possible that the hooded figures were somehow linked to this local legend? Determined to discover the truth, Claire researched the haunted island and found information about a boat that took tourist trips there. She convinced her friends to join her on an expedition to the island, determined to uncover the mystery that had haunted them that terrifying night. The haunted island expedition was challenging but eye-opening. They discovered that the island had a dark history involving shipwrecks, vengeful spirits, and a mysterious ancient ritual. As they explored the island, they found evidence of ancient rituals, such as offerings left to appease restless spirits. In the end, Clara and her friends were unable to fully explain what they had faced that night on the beach, but they suspected that the hooded figures were manifestations of the spirits of the haunted island. They decided it was best to leave the island alone, without further disturbing the spirits that resided there. The spooky beach experience and exploration of the haunted island brought them together in a unique way. They shared a dark secret and a deep understanding of the unknown. As they drove back to town, Clara and her friends knew that the terrifying night at the beach would never be forgotten, and that they had gained a new perspective on the supernatural world around them.